throughout human interaction, masks have always played a central role, not the physical masks of theater or festivals, but the psychological masks people wear to navigate social reality. Narcissists are masters of this art. They construct and display carefully curated identities, projecting an image that appears confident, charming, or admirable. But the irony is profound. The masks they create end up revealing far more than they manage to conceal. If you observe closely, every mask carries the signature of the hidden self it tries so desperately to protect. Narcissists wear masks for one primary reason: to hide their deep-seated insecurities and vulnerabilities. Their entire sense of self is often built on fragile foundations, making them hypersensitive to criticism, rejection, or any perceived threat to their image. Instead of confronting these vulnerabilities, they craft a persona that can shield them from emotional exposure. This persona is often magnetic, drawing others in through charm, wit, or exaggerated confidence. People are naturally attracted to certainty and charisma, and narcissists intuitively understand how to simulate both. However, the longer you interact with them, the more cracks begin to appear. These cracks are not accidental, they are the natural consequence of maintaining an artificial identity that cannot sustain itself under real human connection. Narcissists tend to exaggerate their virtues and suppress their flaws, but human behavior is complex, and no mask can fully suppress the unconscious. Through their language, body posture, micro-expressions, and reactions under pressure, they inadvertently reveal aspects of their true nature. One of the clearest ways their masks reveal them is through inconsistency. Narcissists are often highly adaptable in superficial situations. They can charm strangers, dominate conversations, and mirror the emotions of others to appear relatable. But when their ego feels threatened or their narrative is challenged, their behavior changes abruptly. The mask slips sometimes for just a moment, but those moments are revealing. The sudden shift from charisma to hostility, from confidence to defensiveness, exposes the fragile core they are trying to hide. Another revealing factor is the exaggerated nature of the mask itself. Narcissists often lean into extremes: the overly generous friend, the flawless intellectual, the heroic victim. These exaggerated identities are designed to distract others from looking too closely. But the very intensity of these portrayals is a giveaway. Genuine qualities don't need to be performed, they manifest naturally. When someone tries too hard to appear perfect, admirable, or morally superior, they inadvertently signal that something underneath is being concealed. The way narcissists respond to praise is also a key indicator. At first, their charm makes it seem like they appreciate recognition gracefully, but if you pay attention, praise acts like fuel. Their eyes light up, their body language becomes more expansive, and they subtly direct the conversation back to themselves. Their need for admiration is bottomless, and their reaction to flattery often exposes the dependency their mask is built on. While they project confidence, their emotional stability is tied to external validation, which becomes visible through their disproportionate hunger for attention. Similarly, their reaction to criticism or indifference is even more revealing. A well-constructed mask should, in theory, protect against emotional vulnerability, but narcissists cannot tolerate anything that threatens their idealized self-image. Even mild feedback can trigger irritation, passive aggression, or outright rage. When the mask is challenged, their defenses flare up instantly, revealing not strength, but fragility. This inability to accept imperfection shows that the mask is not a stable extension of their identity, but a desperate shield against exposure. In intimate relationships, the mask tends to erode faster. Narcissists can sustain the illusion in short interactions, but deeper connections require authenticity, empathy, and emotional consistency, qualities their constructed persona lacks. Over time, partners, friends, or close colleagues begin to notice discrepancies between the public charm and the private behavior. The narcissist may appear generous and empathetic in public, but behind closed doors, they can be controlling, dismissive, or emotionally distant. This split is not random, it is a structural feature of their psyche. The mask functions best when the audience is external, not intimate. Another layer of revelation comes from projection. Narcissists often accuse others of the very traits they secretly struggle with. They might label others as selfish, insecure, or attention-seeking while embodying those traits themselves. These accusations are not merely tactics to deflect blame, they are unconscious admissions. By observing what a narcissist criticizes most in others, you can often glimpse the aspects of themselves they are trying hardest to suppress behind the mask. Their language patterns also betray their inner world. Narcissists frequently use absolute statements, self-referential language, and value-laden judgments. Their narratives often revolve around themes of superiority, exceptionalism, or victimhood. These linguistic habits are not random choices, they mirror the psychological architecture behind the mask. Someone who constantly talks about how different or misunderstood they are is often unconsciously revealing their deep desire for specialness and validation. Even their charm has tells. Genuine warmth flows naturally and adapts to context, but narcissistic charm is performative. It is often too polished, too rehearsed, or selectively applied. They might treat authority figures with exaggerated respect, while subtly demeaning those they perceive as lower in status. This selective charm reveals their hierarchical worldview and their dependency on controlling social dynamics. The greatest irony is that narcissists believe their masks are impenetrable, yet those very masks serve as maps to their hidden selves. Every exaggerated gesture, every defensive reaction, every carefully constructed narrative leaves psychological fingerprints. The harder they try to conceal, the more distinct those fingerprints become. Observing their patterns with clarity allows one to see beyond the performance and into the motives, fears, and wounds they are trying to bury beneath layers of artificial identity compliance. When dealing with narcissists is not an act of kindness or harmony, it is the oxygen that keeps their control alive. Narcissists rely on the willingness of others to accommodate, adapt, and submit to their demands, even when those demands are unreasonable or emotionally damaging. What may appear as peaceful cooperation on the surface is, in reality, a subtle but powerful reinforcement of their authority. Every time you comply to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, or to maintain a fragile sense of harmony, you unintentionally strengthen the psychological chains they use to control you. Narcissists are masters at detecting pliability in others. They can sense when someone is empathetic, eager to please, or uncomfortable with confrontation. These traits, though admirable in healthy relationships, are easily weaponized in toxic dynamics. The narcissist quickly learns what behaviors earn your compliance, whether it's guilt, tripping, silent treatment, charm, or veiled threats. Once they understand which buttons to press, they can manipulate you with precision. What begins as a single concession can quietly grow into a pattern where your boundaries are repeatedly tested, stretched, and eventually erased. One of the most insidious aspects of this dynamic is that compliance often feels like the safer option in the moment. When narcissists face resistance, they can respond with anger, emotional withdrawal, or calculated manipulation. This creates a psychological cost for standing your ground. To avoid that cost, many people give in, not because they agree, but because they want to minimize drama or emotional pain. Over time, this repeated choice creates a cycle of learned helplessness where you start believing that resistance is futile and compliance is the only way to keep the situation stable. The narcissist interprets your compliance not as an act of temporary compromise, but as confirmation of their dominance. Each time you yield, you teach them that your boundaries are negotiable. This encourages them to push further, to demand more, to see how much control they can extract without facing consequences. The dynamic evolves from occasional manipulations to an entire unspoken system where their desires take precedence and your needs become secondary. This shift often happens gradually, making it difficult to recognize until you feel trapped within it. Compliance also feeds the narcissist's ego. They see themselves as superior, deserving of special treatment, and entitled to control the emotional climate around them. Your willingness to accommodate their moods and whims reinforces this self-image. If you constantly apologize to smooth things over, adjust your behavior to avoid upsetting them, or prioritize their comfort over your own well-being, you validate their sense of importance. They begin to expect this treatment as a natural part of the relationship rather than an exception. Emotional manipulation plays a significant role in maintaining this control. Narcissists often use guilt as a lever. They might say things like, "After everything I've done for you, you can't do this one thing for me." Or, "If you really cared, you wouldn't act this way." These statements are designed to make you doubt yourself, to make you feel selfish for asserting boundaries. The more you comply out of guilt, the more skilled they become at using it to keep you submissive. This manipulation operates under the radar, leaving you feeling responsible for their happiness or stability, even though that responsibility was never yours to carry. Fear is another powerful motivator. Narcissists can create environments where non-compliance is met with punishment, emotional withdrawal, cold silence, sudden rage, or calculated humiliation. Over time, you begin to anticipate these reactions and adjust your behavior preemptively. You comply before conflict even arises, convincing yourself that you are avoiding unnecessary drama. In truth, you are living reactively, constantly adapting to their shifting moods and demands, slowly losing a sense of personal agency. Compliance also fosters dependency. Narcissists often isolate their targets emotionally, sometimes socially, creating a dynamic where your sense of security becomes tied to their approval. The more you comply, the more they position themselves as the center of your emotional world. They condition you to look to them for validation, to measure your worth through their reactions, and to fear their disapproval. This dependency makes it increasingly difficult to break free from the cycle as the thought of upsetting or losing them begins to feel unbearable. Another subtle way compliance fuels control is through normalization. When you repeatedly allow small violations of your boundaries, they stop feeling like violations. What once felt unacceptable becomes routine. For example, a narcissist might begin by interrupting you during conversations, then later dismissing your opinions entirely, and eventually controlling decisions that affect your life. Each stage builds upon the previous one, normalized by your silence and acquiescence. By the time the control is blatant, the psychological groundwork has already been laid, making resistance feel almost foreign. This dynamic doesn't just affect personal relationships, it extends to workplaces, friendships, and even family structures. In professional settings, narcissistic leaders thrive when employees comply without question, enabling toxic power imbalances to flourish. In families, compliant members often become emotional caretakers, constantly smoothing over conflicts and absorbing tension while the narcissist's behavior goes unchecked. In friendships, compliance can look like constantly making excuses for someone's selfishness, believing that loyalty means enduring their disrespect without confrontation. The tragedy of compliance is that it often stems from good intentions. Many people comply because they care deeply, want to avoid unnecessary pain, or believe that understanding and patience will eventually change the narcissist's behavior. But narcissists interpret kindness as weakness, patience as permission, and forgiveness as opportunity. The more you give, the more they take, until the balance of power tilts entirely in their favor. Breaking this pattern begins with awareness, recognizing that compliance is not neutral, but actively sustaining their control is the first step toward reclaiming personal power. Once you see how your actions contribute to the dynamic, you can begin to set boundaries, even if they are uncomfortable at first. Every moment of resistance chips away at the structure of control that compliance helped build. And awareness transforms the subtle chains of control into visible patterns that can no longer operate unnoticed. Projection is one of the most powerful psychological defense mechanisms, and narcissists wield it with surgical precision. Instead of facing their own flaws, insecurities, and emotional wounds, they displace these unwanted traits onto others, turning their inner shadows into external targets. This act of psychological redirection allows them to maintain their idealized self-image while manipulating the people around them into accepting emotional burdens that don't belong to them. Shadow projection is not just a defensive habit for narcissists, it's a deliberate weapon used to control perception, distort reality, and destabilize their targets. At the core of narcissism lies a deep fear of inadequacy. The narcissist constructs a grandiose identity to mask this fear, but the shadow, the collection of rejected, denied, and suppressed traits, does not disappear simply because it's ignored. These hidden aspects remain active in the unconscious, waiting to surface. To avoid confronting this discomfort, the narcissist projects these disowned parts onto others. For example, if they are envious, they will accuse others of jealousy. If they are manipulative, they will label others as schemers. If they feel shame, they will highlight someone else's supposed flaws to deflect attention from their own. This projection is often so convincing because narcissists deliver it with absolute certainty. Their accusations come across as confident, even righteous, leaving their targets confused and defensive. Most people, especially those who are empathetic, instinctively question themselves when accused. The narcissist counts on this. They rely on their target's self-reflective nature to absorb the projection without suspicion. By shifting their internal negativity outward, they not only avoid self-confrontation, but also destabilize their victims, making them easier to control. Shadow projection also helps narcissists shape the social narrative in their favor. By accusing others of their own flaws, they control the story that others hear. For example, a narcissist who is deeply insecure about their competence might constantly undermine a colleague's abilities, spreading subtle criticisms to others. In doing so, they distract attention from their own inadequacies while positioning themselves as superior. This form of psychological sleight of hand is especially effective in groups where narratives can spread quickly and perceptions are often shaped by the loudest or most confident voice. Another layer to this weapon is emotional transference. When narcissists project their internal chaos, they often do it in ways that provoke emotional reactions. They might accuse someone of being selfish in a moment when they themselves are acting selfishly, triggering the target's guilt and defensiveness. This reaction serves two purposes. First, it provides the narcissist with emotional validation. They see the target reacting and interpret that reaction as evidence that their accusation was correct. Second, it gives them a sense of control as they successfully shift the emotional focus away from themselves and onto the other person. In close relationships, shadow projection can be devastating because it happens subtly and repeatedly. Over time, the target begins to internalize the narcissist's accusations. If you're constantly told you're ungrateful, selfish, jealous, or too sensitive, eventually those labels start to shape how you see yourself. Narcissists exploit this psychological erosion to maintain dominance. By making their target doubt their own character, they weaken their resistance and increase emotional dependence. The victim becomes preoccupied with self-correction, while the narcissist remains free to avoid accountability. Projection also allows narcissists to maintain their emotional equilibrium without engaging in self-awareness. Self-reflection would force them to confront their shadow, an experience they find intolerable. Instead, they externalize their discomfort, creating enemies, critics, or flawed individuals around them. This constant external battle keeps their internal world organized according to their preferred narrative. They are the misunderstood, superior, or morally justified figure surrounded by others who just don't get it. This narrative protects their ego, but damages everyone around them. One particularly manipulative form of projection is when narcissists accuse their targets of motives or intentions they themselves hold. For example, a narcissist who is being dishonest may accuse their partner of lying. A controlling narcissist may claim their friend is trying to dominate the relationship. These accusations are often strategically timed to preempt suspicion or deflect scrutiny. By projecting their intentions first, they set the stage in a way that makes any counter accusation look like mere retaliation. This maneuver is psychologically disorienting for the target and incredibly effective at obscuring the truth. The intensity of the projection often reveals its origin. When narcissists project, their accusations are rarely mild or measured. They are emotionally charged, disproportionate, and delivered with conviction that seems unshakable. This is because they are not responding to external reality, but to their own internal fears. Their reactions are intense because the traits they project are the very ones they cannot tolerate within themselves. By attacking these traits in others, they temporarily relieve the pressure of their own inner conflict. Shadow projection also plays a critical role in smear campaigns a common tactic narcissists use when relationships deteriorate. If they sense that someone has seen through their facade or threatens their control, they project their own malicious traits onto that person publicly. They might portray themselves as the victim of betrayal, disrespect, or cruelty, while painting the other as unstable or harmful. This projection, when repeated and delivered persuasively, can shape the perceptions of others and isolate the target socially. It's a preemptive strike designed to maintain their image and neutralize perceived threats. What makes shadow projection so effective as a weapon is that it exploits natural human tendencies. People generally want to understand themselves, to correct mistakes, and to be seen as good by others. Narcissists hijack these instincts, turning their target's empathy and self-reflection into tools of manipulation. The more the target analyzes their behavior in response to projections, the less attention is directed at the narcissist's actual motives. This redirection is not accidental, it's a survival strategy for the narcissist's fragile ego. Recognizing projection requires stepping back from the immediate emotional charge of the accusation and examining patterns over time. Narcissists are consistent in their use of projection because it serves multiple functions. It protects their self-image, destabilizes others, and reshapes social narratives to their advantage. Their accusations often tell you more about them than they do about you. By observing what they project most frequently, you gain insight into the insecurities and shadow elements they work so hard to hide from themselves and from the world around them. Boundaries are one of the most effective psychological tools for maintaining personal power and emotional clarity. And that is precisely why narcissists fear them. Boundaries draw invisible lines that define where one person ends and another begins, protecting individuality, autonomy, and emotional well-being. For healthy individuals, boundaries create mutual respect and understanding. But for narcissists, boundaries represent resistance to their control. They thrive in spaces where lines are blurred, where emotional access is unlimited, and where their dominance goes unchallenged. When you establish firm boundaries, you disrupt the environment they rely on to manipulate, dominate, and extract emotional energy. Narcissists often view relationships not as partnerships, but as power dynamics. They prefer environments where they can set the rules, dictate the emotional climate, and keep others reactive and uncertain. Boundaries are threatening because they limit this control. A boundary is like holding up a mirror that says, "You don't get to define my reality," and this unsettles the narcissist's sense of superiority. They want unquestioned access to your time, energy, and emotions. They want the freedom to invade, provoke, and control without consequence. Boundaries block these intrusions and expose the fragility beneath their inflated self-image. One of the reasons narcissists fear boundaries so much is that boundaries demand accountability. When you clearly express what behavior is acceptable and what isn't, you remove their ability to operate in the shadows. Their tactics, guilt-tripping, gaslighting, emotional manipulation, rely on ambiguity and blurred lines. Boundaries illuminate the situation. They create structure and predictability, making it harder for narcissists to twist narratives or shift blame. Once you state a boundary, the narcissist faces a choice: respect it or reveal their hostility toward it. Either way, their control diminishes. In many cases, narcissists will initially test boundaries rather than attack them directly. They may push against your stated limits subtly, making comments like, "You're being too sensitive," or "You're overreacting." These tests are designed to gauge how serious you are about enforcing your limits. If you back down, they learn that your boundaries are flexible and can be eroded over time. If you remain consistent, they become unsettled because they realize that their usual manipulation tactics are no longer as effective. Boundaries expose the game they play, and narcissists prefer environments where the game remains hidden. Another reason boundaries provoke fear is that they disrupt the narcissist's emotional feeding patterns. Narcissists rely on a constant flow of attention, admiration, and emotional reactions, positive or negative, to sustain their inflated self-image. When you set boundaries, you regulate your emotional availability, you decide when and how you engage. This deprives them of their usual supply of validation and control. For example, refusing to engage in circular arguments or not responding to provocation takes away their sense of dominance in those moments. Boundaries shift the power dynamic from reactive to deliberate, and narcissists interpret this shift as a threat to their psychological control. Boundaries also force narcissists to confront their own limitations, something they deeply resist. They are accustomed to seeing themselves as exceptions to rules, believing that they deserve special treatment. When you set boundaries, you communicate that they are subject to the same limits as everyone else. This contradicts their grandiose self-image. The idea that they cannot trespass at will, demand constant attention, or control the flow of interaction destabilizes the illusion of superiority they rely on to navigate the world. In close relationships, boundaries expose the emotional asymmetry that narcissists depend on. They often structure dynamics so that you give more attention, more patience, more understanding, while they take more. Boundaries disrupt this flow by asserting reciprocity. When you say no to unreasonable demands, limit access during emotional manipulation, or refuse to participate in endless drama, you break the unspoken contract that keeps you in a submissive role. This is why narcissists often react to boundaries with rage, sulking, or intensified manipulation. It's not because the boundary is inherently unfair, it's because the boundary disrupts the imbalance they have worked so carefully to create. Narcissists also fear boundaries because boundaries expose their emotional dependency. Although they project an image of independence and superiority, their self-worth often depends on external validation and control. When someone sets clear limits, the narcissist is forced to face the uncomfortable truth that they rely on others for ego reinforcement. This realization threatens the stability of their false self. Their fear is not just about losing control over another person, it's also about being confronted with their own inner emptiness when their usual methods no longer work. Setting boundaries often triggers defensive strategies in narcissists. They may respond with gaslighting, trying to make you question your right to set limits in the first place. They might accuse you of being cold, selfish, or ungrateful, framing your boundary as an attack rather than a self-protective measure. They may attempt to escalate emotionally, using anger or guilt to pressure you into compliance. These reactions are not genuine reflections of the boundary's unfairness. They are tactics to re-establish control. The intensity of their pushback often mirrors how threatened they feel by the boundary. In some cases, narcissists will appear to respect boundaries temporarily, but this is usually a strategic pause rather than genuine acceptance. They may comply briefly to regain your trust, only to test the limits again later when your guard is down. This cycle of temporary respect followed by boundary erosion is a hallmark of narcissistic dynamics. It's designed to create confusion and wear down your resolve over time. Understanding this pattern is essential because it reveals that the issue is not the specific boundary, but the narcissist's discomfort with any form of limitation. Another revealing aspect is how narcissists often accuse others of being controlling when boundaries are set. This reversal is a form of projection. They frame your attempt to define personal limits as an infringement on their freedom, positioning themselves as the victim. This tactic is designed to make you feel guilty for asserting yourself. By flipping the narrative, they hope to pressure you into retracting your boundary to restore the illusion of harmony. Recognizing this reversal for what it is, a defense mechanism, helps to maintain clarity in moments of emotional manipulation. Ultimately, boundaries function as psychological language, communicating self-respect, clarity, and emotional sovereignty. Narcissists fear this language because they cannot control it, distort it, or fully silence it. It stands firm against their shifting narratives and emotional tactics, forcing them to either adapt to a reality they cannot dominate or retreat to find someone more malleable. Boundaries reveal their limitations, challenge their illusions, and create spaces where their manipulative strategies lose their potency. Emotional detachment is not about becoming cold, indifferent, or unfeeling. It is about reclaiming control over where your emotional energy flows. In relationships with narcissists, emotional entanglement is their greatest weapon. They thrive on your reactions, whether positive or negative, because your emotional engagement gives them power. Empowerment begins when you learn to detach emotionally, to stop feeding their manipulations with constant responses, and to reclaim your sense of inner stability. Detachment does not mean you stop caring about your life or your well-being. It means you stop participating in the toxic emotional dynamics that narcissists rely on to dominate and destabilize. Narcissists are skilled at pulling people into emotional games. They use charm, praise, criticism, guilt, and even silence as tools to provoke reactions. Each reaction, whether it's defending yourself, trying to explain, getting upset, or chasing their approval, reinforces their sense of control. Your emotions become the strings they pull to make you dance to their rhythm. Detachment cuts those strings. When you no longer react the way they expect, their strategies lose effectiveness. It's like removing the fuel from a fire. Without your emotional energy, their control mechanisms begin to weaken. One of the core reasons emotional detachment is so empowering is that it shifts the internal locus of control. When entangled with a narcissist, your mood, self-worth, and sense of peace often become dependent on their behavior. If they're charming, you feel good. If they're cold or critical, you feel anxious or inadequate. This emotional dependency gives them immense power. Detachment reverses this dynamic. Instead of allowing their behavior to dictate your emotional state, you become the stabilizing force within yourself. Your well-being stops being a reaction to their moods and starts being a deliberate choice rooted in self-awareness. Detachment also exposes manipulation for what it is. Narcissists rely on emotional fog, confusion, guilt, anxiety, or hope to keep you reactive and uncertain. When you detach, the fog begins to clear. You start seeing patterns more objectively. Instead of responding impulsively to provocations, you observe them calmly, recognizing them as predictable tactics rather than personal truths. This clarity is powerful because it breaks the illusion that you are trapped in their emotional orbit. It allows you to make deliberate decisions rather than emotional ones, weakening their psychological grip. In practice, emotional detachment begins with awareness. It means recognizing when you are being pulled into unnecessary arguments, circular conversations, or emotional traps. Narcissists love to keep you stuck in loops where no resolution is possible. They provoke, you react, and the cycle repeats endlessly. Detachment interrupts this loop by refusing to play the game. It involves choosing silence over endless justification, calm observation over emotional escalation, and firm boundaries over reactive explanations. By doing so, you starve the dynamic of the energy it needs to continue. Another essential aspect of detachment is not taking their behavior personally. Narcissists project their inner chaos outward, and their actions are reflections of their insecurities, fears, and ego needs, not accurate assessments of your worth. When you take their behavior personally, you internalize their projections and make their issues your own. Detachment creates a psychological barrier, allowing you to see their actions as about them, not about you. This separation is crucial for maintaining self-esteem and emotional clarity in the face of their manipulation. Detachment also involves regulating your own emotional responses. Narcissists often exploit strong emotional reactions to gain leverage. If you become visibly upset, they might mock your sensitivity. If you passionately defend yourself, they might twist your words to paint you as the aggressor. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop feeling emotions. It means you become mindful of how you express them. It's the difference between feeling anger internally and reacting in a way that gives them ammunition. Detachment allows you to maintain emotional composure, which confuses and unsettles narcissists who expect predictable emotional responses. Importantly, detachment is not the same as disengagement from reality. It is not about pretending problems don't exist. It is about refusing to get emotionally swept up in dynamics you cannot control. You can acknowledge a narcissist's behavior, set boundaries, or make strategic choices without being consumed by emotional turmoil. This approach protects your mental and emotional resources, which narcissists often deplete through constant drama and unpredictability. Detachment preserves your clarity, allowing you to act based on principles rather than impulses. Detachment often provokes strong reactions from narcissists. They may escalate their tactics to regain emotional control, using guilt, rage, or charm to pull you back into the familiar dance. This reaction is predictable because your detachment represents a loss of power for them. They may accuse you of being distant, unloving, or selfish in an attempt to trigger guilt and re-engage your emotions. Recognizing these attempts for what they are, a strategy to reclaim control, helps you maintain your detachment without internalizing their accusations. Another critical element of emotional detachment is shifting your focus inward. When dealing with narcissists, much of your attention gets consumed by analyzing their behavior, anticipating their moods, or managing their reactions. Detachment redirects this energy toward yourself. Instead of obsessing over their approval, you invest in your growth, values, and emotional resilience. This inward focus weakens their influence because your sense of worth is no longer externally anchored in their unpredictable behavior. Detachment also enables you to see the relationship dynamic from a higher vantage point. When emotionally entangled, your perspective narrows. You become reactive, focusing on each incident as it happens. Detachment gives you distance, allowing you to observe the larger pattern of manipulation, control, and emotional dependency. This broader view empowers you to make strategic decisions, whether that means reinforcing boundaries, reducing contact, or eventually walking away based on reality rather than emotional impulses. Perhaps one of the most liberating aspects of emotional detachment is that it breaks the illusion of control narcissists hold. Their power thrives in emotional chaos, in keeping you constantly reacting, doubting, and seeking their approval. Detachment is the quiet refusal to participate in that chaos. It is the moment you stop dancing to their rhythm and start creating your own. This shift does not require confrontation or drama. It requires consistency, awareness, and inner strength. Over time, emotional detachment erodes the foundations of their control, because their manipulation cannot survive without your emotional participation